Shah. This will be moderated by Ayesha. Dr. Ayesha Shah is the co-chair of the International Relations Committee of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. She's going to introduce Bina to you.
Right, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and thank you for being here for this book launch. Very excited to have this conversation with a absolutely wonderful friend, and as I say, sort of someone who's pretty much in a league of her own in terms of her thought process, in terms of her work in feminism, her sort of work in journalism. And you may have all read her writings, her op-eds that have come out, but today we're going to talk about her book, Before She Sleeps, that we're launching today at this point. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is kind of weird.
I know.
Like talking here.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend about 20-25 minutes having a conversation with Bina, and then perhaps open it up for a couple of very burning questions. So Bina, wow, what a book. I started reading it about a week ago, and I thought I would get done with it, but really it's just the process of reading it, the use of language, the use of imagery, besides the story that's so gripping has been so great that I have to convince I've only gone through half of the book. So let's just get straight into it. Tell us a little bit about sort of the inspiration behind. So you've written very artistically and using a lot of metaphorically using some language to about an idea that people just write about in journalism. People write about in terms of facts. People write about in terms of gender equity indexes, or people talk about in terms of prevalences and figures. But you chose to use a story, and you chose to write about a world that is quite dystopian in some ways, gripping, but also in some ways a little bit scary as we think about sort of what is the worst that can happen if there was a world without women, and what is the worst.
Right.
So where did that inspiration come from? What were you thinking? Tell us a little bit about the process of how you came up with this idea.
Thank you, Dr. Ayesha Mian, for that wonderful introduction. I'm quite overwhelmed, actually, because I wrote this book. It was published 3 years ago, and this is actually the first public event that I am having for it. And I'm honored that my book has made its way. It was born in Pakistan, but then it went to the United States. It's been published in Germany, it's been published in Turkey, in German and Turkish, and it's been published in India. And then it was meant to come to Pakistan, but the trade embargo took place between our two countries. So finally, the book has reached courtesy of Liberty Publishing, who agreed to buy the rights from my Indian publisher so that my Pakistani audience could get to it at last. So before I start, I want to thank everybody at Liberty Publishing and everybody who was involved with making this book come here at last. I'm really, really happy about this.
And we're happy that it's here.
And before I go on to answer your very erudite question, I want to make a statement. Writers don't always like to get political, but I think today I need to be, and that is to say that as a writer and as an artist, I staunchly oppose the invasion that is taking place in Ukraine today. I feel the need to say this. Writers want peace. We want cultural links between all countries of all nations of the world. We don't want war. I feel I can say that because I've written about a world war in this book, a nuclear war which actually destroys both India and Pakistan. And this week, as we contemplate the possibility of nuclear war once again, I find it shocking and a horror. So I want to say that I oppose the invasion of Ukraine unequivocally, just as I would oppose the invasion of Iraq, of Afghanistan, military action in Syria and Kashmir, and the situation in Palestine. As a writer, all invasions, all military actions to me that are of aggression are unjustified. So having said that, I would like to just tell you a little bit about this book before she sleeps. It is a dystopia. It is, which puts it in the genre of science fiction, but it's in its own little category of science fiction. And a dystopia imagines a world that none of us want to live in the future. My particular dystopia imagines a world where nuclear war has devastated India and Pakistan and affected the entire Southwest Asian region, which stretches from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, the Gulf, Middle Eastern states, and so on and so forth. And because of this nuclear war, the effects have been so devastating that a virus begins to mutate. And it is a virus that affects women only because it creates a sort of deadly form of cervical cancer, which wipes out the population of women unbelievably fast. So what we have left is a world, a mini world, without a substantial female population. Now, you might ask me, how did I come up with this premise? Because, you know, wars generally tend to kill men. Wars and these kinds of things, men are the people who tend to bear the brunt, but I wanted to highlight that no, it's actually women that also go through so much violence and so much displacement and so much disruption because of war. The hidden cost of war is really what it does to women. So, but I didn't want to say this in a journalistic way, which I have done many times. I didn't want to write about the oppression of women in the Middle East or in Pakistan or in India, in all our countries, in a nonfiction way, because everybody does that. So I wanted to deal with this situation or this imagined paradigm in an artistic way. Because to begin with, I'm a writer. Journalism for me is a vehicle which I use to express thoughts about society. But to really make an impact, I turn to art. So I imagine this world, which is an unnamed Middle Eastern country, about 50 years into the future. The year is 2070. There are 1 woman left to every 20 men in this area. Boundaries and borders have been destroyed. Countries have fallen apart and reconfigured themselves into different trading areas and different geopolitical configurations. What we have is a vastly changed world and a people that are struggling to adapt and adjust to it. How the government of this country chooses to deal with this is to impose a strict authoritarian, a martial law basically, and then immediately clamp down on the freedoms and space for the few women that are left. Instead of valuing them and instead of and they give lip service and mouth service to the idea that our women are so precious, but in reality they restrict their movements, their reproductive freedom. They assign them to marry multiple times. So each woman must marry 4 or 5 men because there are so few women left that men are going without spouses. They're becoming incredibly violent. There are rape gangs and bands of young men that are roaming the country enacting sexual violence on everybody. So the government seizes on this as a solution. And within this society, there are a very small amount of women who resist this new order. And you would have to read the book to find out how they do that.
So wonderful. So Bina, from what you talked about how there is a virus that wipes out a lot of people, and then it's really affecting the women. You talked about the nuclear war. You wrote this book 3 to 4 years ago.
I did.
Right? So tell us a little bit about the clairvoyance around this, right? So how did you know that in 3 to 4 years we will have a virus that will take over the world and there will be this existential threat of some nuclear warfare, worrying us and scaring us?
Well, on the surface of it, I could say that I had no idea, and it was just ideas that came to me. How do I wipe out 2 countries? I didn't want to write about India and Pakistan. I'm so tired of India and Pakistan that I actually destroyed them.
Right.
And then I had to figure out what were the repercussions of all of that, and how do I make the women actually disappear? Well, how about they all die off in a mysterious plague? But the truth is that these are not new events to our world. They have happened before. We've had viruses before, we've had pandemics before, we've had nuclear war, we've had a nuclear action before, we've had nuclear accidents, and we have seen what they do to people. We have all the evidence behind us, and my job as a writer of a dystopia and of science fiction is to imagine this into the future and to forecast it. So it may look like it's very mysterious, but it's actually quite calculated.
Right. So you also talk about assigned roles in the book. You know,
Gender
there are
roles.
Gender roles.
Yes.
There are assigned gender roles, and there is this idea from the leaders of the Green City that assigning roles leads to, peace and harmony and avoids anarchy. What do you see in our real world that you kind of projected onto that world? Do we work with that in our space as well?
So the propaganda that Green City, which is the capital of this futuristic Middle Eastern country, which is very, scientifically advanced, technologically advanced, they're post-religious, nobody's religious in this country. But the propaganda that they put out is from 100 years previous. To say that we have advanced scientifically, but we still haven't advanced in terms of gender equality, gender sort of, the erasure of strict gender roles for women and for men. I think what I was trying to say is that this is propaganda that I hear every day living in Pakistan. Men should do this, women should do that. Men are suited for this, women are suited for that. Not even 100 years ago, we heard people, scientists saying, men's brains are like this, women's brains are like that. Men's bodies are like that, women's bodies are like that. And so all I was doing was taking that, stretching it out, amplifying it, taking it to the extreme, and trying to see, how much can this government get away with? And basically my answer was that they had to actually really resort to a very punitive system in order to make this artificial way of life to make it actually work. And they call it a gender emergency, just like we in Pakistan have seen the words emergency used to sort of keep us under martial law and take away our constitutional rights and our freedoms and so on and so forth. So I was really playing with political language. I'm a great fan of George Orwell, and he wrote Politics in the English Language, and he said that it's really language that we use to justify fascism and authoritarianism. Language is what we use to make that work, to make it happen. It's still happening today, and I see that happening as much in a war or in political situations. And I think that there's always a war enacted on women. Women are always having war enacted on them and on their bodies by the perpetual state of potential violence that we operate under every day. No matter where you are, no matter what country you live in, you as a woman will always feel under threat. It may be lesser, it may be greater, but that dynamic is always there. And how do governments justify the fact that they have not alleviated this, solved this problem, made places safe for women? By using this kind of rhetoric that women are made for this and men are made for that. When you just keep taking it and extrapolating it and flipping the Rubik's Cube of that, this is what you end up with.
Absolutely.
A completely skewed society.
Absolutely. So Bina, I'm going to read out a little excerpt from here, which I really loved. It's from the first chapter. It has nothing to do with feminism, but I will tell you why I was struck by it. So it's short. It says, it's hard to believe that only 100 years ago there was nothing here but sand. Can you imagine a city pushing itself out of the ground, a nation giving birth to itself? First, modest houses, low walls, long dusty roads, the infant city encircled by desert, reminding it of where it came from, then more ambitious buildings, bigger houses, children overtaking fathers, suburban settlements created far and wide, pushing the desert back further and further. And now the desert is a mirage where our ancestors once lived. We have defeated the desert and replaced it with a spear to human achievement. And then there are a couple of more paragraphs, but then there's a line that says, but we have had to pay a heavy price for the new version of normality. This really sent a shiver down my spine. So this is really about, I mean, it felt like you're talking about Dubai. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But
I'll let you decide that for yourself.
Yes, but this is about climate change. This is what we've done to our Earth.
Yes.
This is how we've gone away. So you've incorporated that piece. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, I was very inspired by cities like Dubai, cities like Abu Dhabi, cities like, you know, in Saudi Arabia. They're trying to do smart cities, and actually there is a smart city in the UAE, which I visited as research for one of my other books. And I was fascinated by these Middle Eastern desert countries that are actually changing the face of their own topography. They've planted trees, they suddenly have rain where they never had it before. And yet you can't fight nature. They have a dust storm every once in a while, and just it's all like, so, but there's a price to pay, and that is increased pollution, that is a lessening of diversity. And they have all these conservation efforts and so on and so forth. But it's a real struggle, because it's a struggle between capitalism and, sorry, can you keep the talk down in the corner, you guys? I'm getting very distracted, I'm sorry. So yeah, it's a real struggle between the demands of capitalism and retaining respect for the earth. And nowhere is that more apparent than, I think, what's happening to the Bedouin populations of those countries. The Bedouins live across many countries in that area, and their suicide rates have gone sky high. I was just reading this, because they're so displaced from their old ways of life. They see no way out except to kill themselves. That has to tell you something.
So, and is that something that you thought you'd sort of, you know, integrate into your piece, this idea of, you know, as you're thinking about this dystopian world that we're going away from what was, and we're not aligning ourselves with what the earth says or nature sort of demands, or is just that something, it's just another nuanced
It's another nuance. This is not a cli-fi book. Cli-fi is like climate fiction, sci-fi, science fiction.
Right.
This is feminist dystopia, for whatever that's worth, because I really wanted to concentrate on women and the situation they find themselves in. But it's all part of the atmosphere, and I think this is very much what patriarchy does. It wants to control everything. It wants to control women's bodies. It wants to control the planet. It wants to control our health. It wants to control our minds. It wants to control everything for the sole aim of what? Of making itself bigger, 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 bigger. And it's rapacious, and it's greedy, and it's dangerous.
So there is an aspect of the book that really, you know, kind of gripped me, was there are these transactions that women have with these men that almost feel like these are women who are, you know, going to these men as prostitutes, but they're sexless transactions, right? There's no sex, they're just there. These are men who are governing them the rest of the day. These are men that are wreaking havoc in their lives. These are men, overall, these are men that are doing things that they're not comfortable with, that they're in conflict with, and they go at night to provide comfort to them, to help them sleep better because they can't sleep because of what they've done.
Yeah.
You know, and there's this line, you know, helping them with their dreams so that they're able to dream, and these women stay insomniac. But these are really sexless transactions, right? They're just there, present, to provide that sort of comfort. So tell us a little bit about it.
I know, it sounds weird, doesn't
know.
it, when you talk about it?
Right.
So let me just backtrack by explaining that the women that rebel against this authoritarian system of multiple marriages and endless pregnancy, you know, as if they were just cats giving birth to litter after litter after litter. There are some very, there are are very few women, and they decide they don't want to be part of this society, so they disappear. So they can't leave the country because the borders are closed and controlled, so they go underground, and they live in an old nuclear bunker. And the two women who originally created this shelter they were actually scientists before the regime took over. So they have a lot of scientific knowledge, biologists and chemists. So they go and they create this bunker underground. And as women tend to do, they actually make it quite beautiful. They grow underground gardens, and they use hydroponics, and they use artificial sunlight And they do all sorts of things to create this shelter for women. And I call it the pana, literally. Pana is the Persian word for shelter. We use it here. We call our domestic violence shelters pana. So I wanted to play with that tradition also. So the women that live in this place, they have to survive somehow. How do they make their living? Because you can't live on artificial air alone. What they do is that they come out at night and they visit the elite, the very elite men, the leaders of the society. And as you said, they spend the night with these men, but it's not for sexual comfort. It's for a type of intimacy and comfort that is quite separated from sex, because sex is so regimented and controlled that even they are affected. They're not prostitutes, and I have to make that very clear. They provide something that is on a different plane than just physical comfort. Yes, they're there with their bodies, they're there with their arms to hold these men, they're there with their presence, their breath, all these things that, we tend to think, oh, the value of a woman, what is it? To have sex and to have a baby. But we women know that our value is so much more. Even when you're not having sex or having a baby with a woman, you still want a woman in your life. What for? What for? And that's the space that I was exploring, the what for. When you take the sex and the childbearing and that out of the equation, what is the value of a woman? Is her value only also in relation to what she can provide a man? What is there for herself? What is she when she's amongst women only? So I was looking at all these questions, I would say in a metaphorical, in a poetic, and an artistic way. And this was all a big experiment. And there were a lot of readers who were just like, this is stupid. Of course they're gonna break the rules. Of course. Why of course? Why automatically? Look at how we are in our countries, in our Muslim countries, for example. We say that you must not do this and this outside of marriage. Okay, spend time with somebody, work with somebody, hang out with somebody, do whatever, but don't do this thing. So what I was doing was taking that premise and saying, how far can we stretch it? How far does it go? What happens when we break that? What happens when we do obey it? So I was juggling all these questions.
But they're using this as a bargain of their own freedom, right?
So what they do with this is that they exchange this time with these men, and they have what I call sort of benefactors who are providing them with food and with protection and a little bit of security, maybe, electronics, whatever. So women, as women have done throughout the centuries, they are using their own selves to bargain for what they need for survival. That in itself is a form of resistance. That in itself is a form of rebellion.
Yeah, and so I want us to, because we were having this conversation earlier as well, and I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because a lot of times women do things, skirt around sort of the spaces or that the allowances that are given to them or
That's
not
right.
given to them to kind of get to what they want.
That's right.
Sometimes they're kind of looked down upon, sometimes they're seen as passive, sometimes they're seen as, why aren't you just going out and asking for what you need?
Right.
Especially from the West, right? The folks in the West will look at and then there'll be books like Lolita in Tehran, and there'll be books like, these books that come out that paint women in this picture of
Sure.
the bichari, the dependent and stuff.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that.
So what I wanted to say, gosh, wait, let me gather my thoughts because I got a
Sure.
bit distracted. What Western readers said when they read this book was, what the hell is this? Why aren't these women picking up guns and just shooting the men?
Yeah.
That's part two. That's going to happen
Great.
in part
All right.
two.
So
Don't
we're
worry.
looking forward to
I
that.
got
Okay.
that. But in this, what I wanted to show was a more subtle kind of resistance and a more true to what we experience here in Pakistan. We don't smash the patriarchy here. No matter what Aurat March says, no matter what people say about, the Western feminism or the Western style of feminism, it doesn't work for us because our system is so far behind. Women don't even vote here. Women don't even have safety here. So what are we talking about smashing patriarchy? You get smashed, okay? So what we do instead is that we either circumvent our obstacles using our own intelligence, our chalakya, which is our power also. It's not direct power, it's indirect power. It may be passive aggressive, it may be whatever you call it, but it's all we can do. When you are just trying to survive, you will bargain with patriarchy. You will negotiate with it, you will work with it to get what you want. And that is what I wanted to reflect in the pages of this book.
Wonderful. So we're going to open this up to questions. Yes. There's Saad,
A
and then
mic
there's
will be
somebody
passed
behind.
around to
Yes.
you, so just be patient. Please make it a question too, not a 10-minute commentary.
Bina, congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's a wonderful conversation. So actually I have two questions. One is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I'm sensing some echoes. I wonder if that was part of the inspiration in some way. That's one question. Second question actually is for both of you. And it might seem like a hostile question, but it's not. It's more coming out of a sense of understanding gender dynamics and just, so I'm curious, more out of curiosity. How would it have been if a man had written this kind of a story? How would that have been received?
No man could write this story. So there's your answer right there. Sorry, Saad. No man could write this book. Your first question, echoes of Handmaid's Tale. I'm talking back to the Handmaid's Tale. And I'm saying to Margaret Atwood, you wrote this about a Christian country. Well, let me tell you what's going on where we live. You look like kindergarten compared to what we go through. This is kind of my response. Margaret Atwood has been a great support. She's actually written a blurb for me for this book. And she was really excited to see what I did with this. And actually, that's why the book got attention, is because it's about the East. It's about our part of the world. Most feminist dystopia is very Western oriented. So I said, why don't I do something about what I see here? Thanks for the question.
So my name is Shahid. Question is, the dystopian scenario that your creative imagination has foreseen,
Yes.
and you talk about in this book, suppose it becomes reality in times to come, in distant future. Do you think in that dystopian scenario, human civilization or societies will have to adjust and adapt themselves to that changed reality? And in that dystopian scenario, if it becomes a reality in the distant future, all our norms and all our values that we subscribe to or stick to in today will become meaningless? This is my question.
By norms and values, what do you mean specifically?
I mean, in today's world, it is unthinkable that man will, a woman will take more than one husband at a time.
All right.
It's not possible, whether in the Christian world or in Muslim world. I'm talking about your creative imagination, the dystopia you are talking about. In future, in case it becomes reality, let's suppose, it's an argument.
Okay, I got
It's
you.
an argument. So, do you think that in such a scenario, our societies will have to readjust our values, the way we think about this
Okay.
institution of marriage? This is what my
I
question.
got you. Let me tell you that when I was researching this book, one of the things that inspired me was the reality that today, in parts of rural India and Nepal, there are so few women that the women are actually marrying more than one husband. This is already happening. They're marrying brothers, they're being forced to marry brothers, or they're being forced to marry two cousins, the women. So there's no future about it. It's already here. In China, what do you think the ratio is of men to women? Men cannot find wives. This is already here. And we're already seeing that people are changing what they thought was something that could never be changed. Because why? You tell me, you're a man. Why would you go ahead and make this change? If you couldn't find a wife, if you were unable to get married, if you were unable to raise a family the way you envision it, but you had a chance to do so as long as you consented to be in this kind of weird partnership, it's not very normal to me either. There are men that are already saying, okay, I will do this. I think the answer is clear. Anything unnatural like aborting and killing women and putting them out of existence is going to lead to this kind of distortion and devastation, and I would say quite an immoral society in the end.
So, I mean, even though this is dystopia and even though this is, 2070, there's a lot that's going on in the book that's happening today.
That's what
In
Margaret
different
Atwood
facets,
said
like,
when she wrote
absolutely. So
The
it's not-
Handmaid's Tale. She said there was nothing I
Yeah,
wrote in that book that
absolutely.
wasn't already happening
Absolutely.
somewhere in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
My name is Nasir. Okay.
Can we hear from a
Yeah.
woman, actually? I'd really like to take a question from a woman. We've had two
Okay.
men.
Am I allowed to
Go ahead and ask your question,
okay.
but the next one should be to a woman.
Okay. I just want to know examine the state of your mind while writing this book, because you are already living in a patriarchal society. Like the process was agonizing, or just
The
like
process was what? I'm sorry?
what was it painful for you to write
painful
something
for
because
you.
you're already living a
I'll
patriarchal?
tell you that this time period in which I wrote this book was extremely painful for me because our good friend Sabine Mahmood was shot in 2015 while I was writing this book. And then what was academic became very, very urgent and very, very real. So I think that the fevered pace that you will see towards, as the book goes on, reflects exactly what I was going through in the days after she had been killed. We have time for one last question, and I do want Anoki.
Anoki.
Let's hear from you. Since you've read the book, actually.
Yeah, I have. And my question, which I think I've asked you before also, is when I've heard from you right now that you're saying that the guns and everything are coming out in the next book. So I really want to know when it's coming and going to happen, because I want to see some women kick somebody ass in that book.
There is going to be so much ass kicking in that book that you're going to come and thank me afterwards.
She's got good news to tell us today. So,
The book is going to be called The Monsoon War, and it is very much the sequel to this book. It takes the story further and it develops it so that all the frustration you have with all of this in this book, you're going to be very happy at the end of that book. All right. Do we have time for one more
we have
question?
one more question.
One more
There's this
question.
lady
I think that's
behind.
Fatma,
Yeah.
who has also read the book. I love it when people read the book before they come to the session.
Hi, Bina. Just a very simple question about the title. If you could talk a little bit about that. And I thought maybe right at the end there's that remarkable line, Sabine, are you awake? And how it echoes. And does it have anything to do, it ties in, I'm sure, thematically throughout. But could you speak a little bit about the title? It's very fascinating.
Thank you. So really, when you're writing a novel, you have a working title the whole time. It's never going to be the final title unless you're really, really lucky. So I really just call this book Sleep. I called it Sleep. And I wove in the theme of sleep into everything. Sabine, the protagonist, is an insomniac. There's a drug called sleep. There's a ruse that they have to use to get out of their predicament. So there are so many things. And then the book is very noir. It's set in the nighttime, which is the time for sleep, but instead all these funny, weird things are going on. So sleep is woven throughout. And the next book is actually going to be about dawn and daybreak, and that's the theme. So I guess the third one is going to have to be afternoon or evening or something.
Evening, right.
So we came up with the title Before She Sleeps. It's a play on the poem I Have Miles to Go Before I Sleep. Now that poet is a man, and so I decided this book is about women. It's about what happens before she sleeps, right? And that's a reference to death as well, what happens before we die. So yeah, there were a lot of things that went into that. I think it worked in the end. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Bina, for this. Lovely book. Please, all of you, do get the book and read it. It's a beautiful read.
I'm doing
Absolutely
book
wonderful
signings
read.
actually right now at the Liberty Books stall where the book is available. So please come meet me, say hi. Thank you,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ayesha.
So,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.